Good evening. This is Milt Rosenberg. Welcome again to Extension 720. We are told by the pollsters, and I'm sure they've got it basically right, that some 90 to 95% of African Americans are in the Obama camp. There's no surprise, particularly in that finding. However, what is somewhat more surprising is that a number of important intellectual and intellectoid public figures who are black by origin have taken the opposite position and tend to view the works and ways of the Obama administration more critically than that, and indeed have endorsed the opposing candidacy of the former governor of Massachusetts.
720 WGN.
And we welcome our second guest of the evening, talking to us also from the Washington area. Oliver G. McGee is a teacher, a researcher, indeed an administrator who has in his time run the whole research program that has supervised all the research undertakings of at Howard University in Washington, and is the author of a new book titled Jumping the Aisle, subtitle, How I Became a Black Republican in the Age of Obama. I suppose that is a question regularly put to you by your many black friends and family members.
Yes, it is, and thank you for having me this evening, Milt. It's an interesting beginning for moving into this election period, but also an interesting opportunity for renewing the American electorate, particularly for black Americans, as we begin to look at a new age of the evolving American electorate.
Our first guest tonight, Ron Christie, might be called a birthright black Republican. At least he's been a Republican, I gather, through all of his adult years. You clearly are not a Republican by family heritage. You're a black who jumped the aisle, and that is the very title of your book, Jumping the Aisle. I gather you jumped the aisle from voting for Democrats and being a loyal Democrat only as we went into the 2008 presidential election.
That's right. I wrote the book because I had a concern about really where we are looking at actually respecting history, showing which way to go, and looking forward to what kind of future for America. The challenge that we face today is the role of government. That's the biggest issue that I see we're facing at the 2008 election and definitely in the 2012 election.
Well, what did you discern as we were going into the 2008 election that put you off? There must have been some signals in the very campaign as conducted by then candidate Obama that made you question your former loyalties to the Democratic Party.
One of the things that I think we were and are still facing when we look at the highest levels of government is testing the value of diversity in the White House. In the 2008 election, when we were looking at the possibility of having the first black president or the first woman president in Hillary Clinton, at that time I was backing Hillary Clinton. I had served in the Clinton administration, and so when she was rising to become the first woman president, naturally my allegiance were in support of that. But I also saw a great opportunity for America to look at the possibility of having a first woman president.
By the way, what was your service in the administration?
I was in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for the first 2 years of the second term of the Clinton administration, followed by serving former Secretary of Transportation Rodney Slater as his Deputy Assistant Secretary for technology policy as essentially his technology advisor.
You have various degrees, and basically you're trained as an engineer.
That's right. A propulsion engineer and a civil engineer and an aerospace engineer, as a matter of fact.
And more recently, you got yourself an MBA at the business school at the University of Chicago.
Absolutely. Homegrown. Lived at Presidential Towers right downtown in Chicago as I was going through the Booth School of Business at Chicago. And I oftentimes think, in answering your question at that time, Chicago made me right. You go into the Milton School of Economic Thinking in the business school. Milton Friedman taught me, or at least it's the thinking in Chicago for understanding price theory and income theory. And once you see the basis of those two theories, it tends to kind of throw you, at the time I was center-left to center-right.
But you were center-left by virtue of your earlier political socialization, one would have to call it.
That's right. My family, mom and dad, we're a Democratic family. My father was a laborer in the city of Cincinnati and became the first black fireman of the city of Cincinnati.
Oh, really?
Oliver McGee Jr., yes. He was the first black fireman in the mid-1960s. And my mom, she was a administrator at University of Cincinnati, working on equal opportunity as well as diversity, working with companies such as Procter & Gamble and the great late LaBelle Bond, who used to be the vice president for diversity worldwide for Procter & Gamble under John Pepper. And so in my home, I was raised about the importance of equal opportunity and diversity and many of the traditional, what we call the old democratic core ideas.
It is, of course, the case that for lots of politically active American blacks, a necessary item or set of items high on the agenda is social justice and racial justice for American blacks. An end to segregation is officially over, but in fact, de facto, it still is practiced in many ways. Surely it's still practiced in terms of housing locations and thus also in educational assignment. But beyond that, there is, despite the advance of lots of people on into solid middle-class life and achievement and remuneration, there is still a large body of black people left behind in what is now called the inner city. That's the locution we use now. We used to say the ghetto. And they remain a very disadvantaged group. I was talking earlier, as you know, with Ron Christie, author of the book Black Wards. And his argument is essentially that we must put aside looking for special treatment and special affirmative action of any kind for blacks. That continues, in a way, the ghettoization process, and also continues to foster kind of contempt for the standards that operate in the general culture because they are, quote, too white. What are your... I mean to pursue with you that very question or set of questions right after we pause to serve capitalism in our way and do some commercials. But how do you see the difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party, and at this very moment the difference between the Democratic candidate who seeks re-election as President of the United States and the former governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney, who seeks to replace him? How do you see the difference between them producing relevant differences for those who've got particularly a black agenda? Or is the black agenda no longer relevant? That's the family of questions I want to press upon you as we continue right after this.
This is Extension 720 with Milt Rosenberg on 720 WGN.
And directly back to Oliver G. McGee III, teacher, researcher, and a leading administrator at Howard University in Washington, D.C., author of the recently published book, Jumping the Aisle, How I Became a Black Republican in the Age of Obama. And let me persist with what I was trying to lay out a moment ago. Is there, in your mind, a persisting black agenda which the parties ought to be responding to, or is that no longer of relevance?
Milt, I think there still is, except it's not necessarily civil rights. It's now shifted to economic rights.
Yeah.
And as I write in my book, Jump in the Aisle, which is available on Amazon.com, I'm saying in that it's about the understanding of our money and our votes and our jobs and our productive power. And these are the keys to understanding the perceptions of Black Americans and understanding the bridging of the economic divide between the haves and the have-nots on the left and the right. This is really what Martin Luther King had envisioned that we would be facing when he said, "I have a dream," in 1960s. And now we're in the 21st century in 2012, and we're really looking at the economic rights that he was foretelling. For we as a people are very good at knocking down the walls between us versus them, but are we as a people great at building up structures of sound institutions, family, churches, schools, and businesses and charities outside of the institution of government?
Well, as I was talking earlier with Ron Christie, I raised the question, and I raise it again with you. Indeed, it has preoccupied me for many years, all the more so because I live in Chicago, and I'm at a university that has a strong social science interest in Chicago. You can't be a reactive, intelligent, more or less intelligent human being living in Chicago without being aware that there is a vast body of people in what we used to call the ghetto, and now we're not allowed to say that. We call it the inner city. And we're not allowed to call them Afro-Americans. We call them African-Americans, or we call them black. But even there's a hesitation as to whether you should use the word black. It's also loaded with political correctness and political correctness generated inhibitions that we can rarely address things as directly as, say, Robert Kennedy did during the brief period after his brother's assassination, when he rose as possibly the new tribune of the people and possibly the man who would win the Democratic presidential nomination until his assassination. And you remember, he used to speak of the black underclass, and he said until we undo that underclass status and get people out of the inner city, or out of the ghetto, as he would have called it, until we restore so there are really black families with fathers as well as mothers, and unless we solve the education problem and allow and facilitate full entry into the economy, unless all of those things happen, we will be just perpetuating a black underclass, which does great injury to young, growing people, as well as to the older people who are stuck there. That, it seems to me, is a basic and presenting an omnipresent problem on the American social or socio-political agenda. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I do. I really...
I've spent a lot of verbiage conveying that, but I'm sure you would agree with me. Then, what is the answer to that problem, or to that set of related problems? And is there any way of demonstrating that the Republican Party offers greater hope of resolution, of movement, true movement forward, than does the Democratic Party?
Well, one of the things I oftentimes think about when we're talking about political correctness, we're going to become so politically correct that we're going to run out of words to be correct.
Yes, that's true. Quite true.
And so one of the reasons I wrote the book, Milt, is I said, if we as a people, as a black people, I'm going to go and say as we as a black people, don't feel comfortable about jumping the aisle freely and easily as political taste and styles do change, then how can we as a people remain relevant as those changes and styles change at the policymaking table? How can we as a people retain a seat at the policymaking table to have or have not a chance to narrow the widening gap between the haves and have-nots? Because as the country shifts from its center-left to its center-right, or vice versa, we cannot, as a voting bloc, be so aligned tightly in just one side of the aisle and not be relevant when the country does shift in the opposite side. I spent a lot of time in the book discussing very, very carefully about the role of the contrarian